I want to talk a little bit about what it might look like if you wanted to implement a hybrid workplace for your organization. And so it really starts with, identifying what is it that you're wanting to accomplish with this hybrid workplace. And this is part of where that planning guide can help you understand what your goals are, what strategy is going to work well, but then getting into some of the specifics. So if your goal is to decrease your costs and have some cost savings, then looking at how much space you're using versus how much space you own might be a really key metric in determining how much space do you actually need for your organization. And so once you've then identified, what it is you're trying to accomplish, then you start to look at how do we plan that for our organization? What do our buildings look like? What do our floor plans look like? What types of spaces do we have? How many assignable spaces do we have? How many unassigned or reservable spaces? How many conference rooms? And starting to plan out what that's going to look like. And then the last step in the process is going to be, how do you take that plan and communicate it or deliver it out to your employees so that they know how to interact with this new workplace? Many of them will be coming from the idea where they had a one-to-one seating assignment where they knew where they sat, they knew what their seat was, and that might not be the case moving forward. There might still be some people who have an assigned seat, but there might also be a number of employees who work remotely part of the time, and when they do come into the office, they're going to want to reserve a space in order to be able to get their work done when they're there. And so on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you might identify what the needs are of your employees. And you do want to start with your employee base rather than the space itself, so you can understand what do your employees need, and then figure out how to get this space to match that need. And so the way we do it in our system, this screenshot here is of our analytics platform, and we categorize employees into 4 different groups. And you can see those work styles at the bottom. We have the stationary employees who are in the office every day or most days and spend most of the time at their desk. These are employees who it would make sense for them to have an assigned seat because they're spending a lot of time there. Compared to the category on the right of that, the externally mobile employee, these are ones who might be in their home office 3 days a week and in the corporate office 2 days a week. And so for them, having an assigned seat might not make as much sense, but instead having a group of reservable workstations for them when they do come into the office. And so we have a couple different ways we categorize our employees in order to try and figure out what the real space needs are. And so historically, if you were going into this process, I would have said start with the data, and that's what's going to drive it. And I think that data is still really important. But for most of us, our 2020 data is not going to tell us a whole lot if we look at our badge data to see how often were people showing up, because we had a pandemic and it radically changed how that worked. We may want to look back at our 2019 data, our 2018 data, 2017, and look at that data, but we also want to realize that what we're going back to is going to be different than what we left. So another thing you might want to consider is maybe, like Jennifer mentioned, partnering with your HR team and maybe sending out a survey to your employees to ask them, when COVID is done, what do they think they might want? Do they want to come back to the office every day? Do they enjoy working remotely? Do they want to come back to the office 2 days a week? And we'll actually talk a little bit more about the partnership with HR and some of the other groups in our December webcast. But looking at those 2 different data points, you can start to get a good idea of what is it that your employees are going to need from the space. On the next slide, we're going to talk more then about how do we actually plan for a hybrid workplace? What does that mean? And so when I think about a hybrid workplace and what that definition looks like, I tend to think of a hybrid workplace as having different spaces that work differently for different employees, or even down to the different tasks or activities that employees work on throughout the day. So on the bottom left, I have an example of what some activities are. And the concept here, for those of you who are familiar with it, is very similar to the idea of activity-based working, where you have a variety of settings or workplaces to match what the needs of the employees are. So looking at what that might look like, I have an example of what my schedule might look like for the day, and I have the different colors to represent the different tasks that I'll be working on throughout the day. And looking at this particular day, I see that there might be a number of meetings that I have scheduled, and so I might want to think about maybe going into the office, because maybe those meetings are going to be more effective face-to-face, versus if I had a lot of focus work, maybe that works better from home. And so knowing I might want to come into the office, I then need to start figuring out what spaces do I need when I'm in the office, and how do I reserve those spaces. And that's where you can see in the floor plan, in this example, we have different zones and different types of spaces that are identified for certain activities. So I might want to reserve a workstation as kind of my home base for the day, but then reserve some conference rooms or some private offices for some of my meetings as I'm going through the different activities throughout the day. And then as we go on to the next slide, we have that concept of different activities. We have the concept of different types of employees, the different work styles, or the different employee profiles. So here's two examples where we have our accounting team, a group that in general is going to be stationary. That's an assumption. It's not going to apply to every single person in the accounting team, but the accounting team is a group who might come into the office every day because they need access to their paper files, and they're going to spend a lot of time working at their desks, compared to the marketing team, which again also might come into the office every day because they need access to certain types of printers in order to print out different marketing collateral, see what it looks like, make sure everything's correct. But they may spend a lot of time away from their desk because they're standing at a whiteboard, drawing out the designs for the new marketing materials, or collaborating with the marketing or with the sales team or the engineering team. And so as we look at the different activities, we look at those two different departments and start to understand what types of spaces do they need. We might look at the collaboration one and say, we think the marketing team is going to need more collaboration space compared to the accounting team, but the accounting team might need more focus space than the marketing team. And so this is where you can then start to build up what the ideal hybrid workplace is going to look like for your employees. And so after you've completed this process, moving on to the last step in that identify, plan, deliver is where you look at how do you communicate the new process out to your employees. And so what we have in the screenshot here is an example of the landing page of our reservation system. And as we think about communicating this new process, we want to think about what are the questions or what are the concerns that our employees might have as they're coming back into the workplace. Some of them might still be nervous about COVID. Like Jennifer mentioned, there is some potential vaccines, but neither one is really 100% effective. So are there still going to be the same cleaning standards? And that's where communication is really important. Having that communication strategy is part of the key considerations for a hybrid workplace, and making sure that implementation is successful. Asking what types of questions people might ask, making sure that information is easy for them to find. If they have questions about, do they have to come into the office every day, or what happens if they don't have an assigned desk? What do they do? Do they just show up? Can they reserve something in advance? And making sure you have good communication with your employees. And then after you've gone through all that, you've identified what you want to do, you've planned it out, and you've kind of delivered that initial package to your internal customers, then the next slide, the last thing that you're going to want to work through is you're going to want to continue to follow up and repeat that process. You'll see here, identify, plan, deliver. It doesn't stop once you deliver. It then repeats the cycle, because you want to take a look at the assumptions that you had and see if they were correct. So in here, we're looking at some of our analytics data to see, are spaces being used well? Again, if our long-term goal is to have some cost savings, if we see a lot of red in here, it means we're still not using our space very well. So maybe we had too much collaboration space, but not enough focus space. And we start to challenge those assumptions. We keep iterating through as we continue to work towards those long-term goals.